and welcome everyone to a alternative history stream. Today we are going to be discussing what would have happened if the Byzantine Empire never fell. I'm very lucky to be joined by Hitman. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm doing very well, thank you.
So you suggested it wasn't originally titled this, but you suggested a scenario in this sort of general region. Do you want to explain your interest in this period of history and why you were invested enough to be able to consider possible alternative history scenarios around this?
Well, as some of you who've been watching should know, I have taken part in a couple of AM's recent episodes on orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, particularly in relation to with the Ottoman history, so the Greek War of Independence, and the sort of the Phanariots and that link back to Byzantium, and then also the actual stream where we talked about the sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, and it had me thinking of alternate history. Because obviously the Ottomans had been this great power back that arose in the sort of 14th, 15th, 16th centuries that was sort of a menace to the Europeans. And I'm thinking, though we like to talk about their collapse later on, there is one scenario where they possibly could have, collapsed and not been this great monster, because it's after Bayezid I is captured by Timur. There's actually a 10-year civil war between his four sons, and thinking, well, that'd be interesting to discuss, because if things had gone differently, you may have seen quite an early Ottoman collapse. And I suggested that to you, and you said, well, why not just discuss Byzantium surviving? And I thought, wow, that also is a very interesting and good topic.
Well, yes, I mean, I like to make these streams sort of interesting from many different angles. I mean, it's possible to focus on one particular scenario, but as this is a creative exercise, I tend to like these as much about the how as opposed to in addition to the what if. So the more we focus on a single scenario, say, for example, if one person dies, if one event happens differently, I find it sort of less interesting just going into the pure sort of realms of historical fiction and fantasy, even though that could be interesting to be able to develop such a thing. But I feel it's also rather difficult to spin an entire sort of fiction on stream in this live format at the same time. So in order to, you can say, play to the strengths of this format, I think having the whole panoply of history regarding the various alternative scenarios around the potential fall of Byzantium and what could have gone differently could make for a more sort of multifaceted discussion. However, I just want to come up with a few definitions to begin with. I can already see that someone in the comment section, the eccentric tripper, has already suggested that Byzantium didn't fall. And so it's important here to discuss actually what Byzantium is, because I've harped on quite a few of my streams suggesting that a remnant of Byzantium did survive as the nation of Rome under the Ottomans, and indeed it was the Greek War of Independence that represented the death of that nation of Rome and the rise of a Greek-led state in the Peloponnese. So what is meant by what if Byzantium never fell? Well, obviously, if we look at Byzantium as the rump continuation of the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire collapses in either 476 or 480, depending on who you believe was the last Western Roman emperor. And thereafter, there is only one legally recognized Roman imperial figurehead from 476 or 480 up until the coronation of Charlemagne in 800, where there is now contested legitimacy. That empire in the east begins losing considerable amount of territory to the Arabs in the 7th century. And by the beginning of the 8th century, the new Umayyad dynasty or Umayyad Caliphate have nearly taken control of Anatolia and Constantinople itself. Instead, the city is saved by Leo the Isaurian, Leo III. And thereafter, Byzantium is able to survive. It's not able to achieve the glory of the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, there is a significant imperial presence in Anatolia and in the remnants of the Balkans. And in that core of Anatolia and Thrace, Macedonia, etc., the empire continues up until around the 11th century, when there was a great disaster in Anatolia, the Battle of Manzikert, whereafter the empire loses its principal source of again, revenue, manpower, and most of the imperial administration, Anatolia. So this is really where we get into the idea of talking about the collapse of this Byzantine state, this rump Greek-speaking Eastern Orthodox remnant of the Roman Empire. And also there are two falls, not a single fall either. In terms of talking about this continuation of a Roman-led Greek-speaking state, which is Christian and Orthodox, there is 1204, the Fourth Crusade, when the city is sacked by Venetian and Crusader troops as part of an ongoing succession dispute and dispute over pay. And this leads to the dismemberment and partition of the territory of the former Byzantine Empire into the lands of the Venetians and the Franks. And this period is called the Francocratia, or the rule of the Franks. Moving on from that, there is you can say, a semi-restoration of Byzantium, even though the link with Rome and the legal continuity of the empire has been broken. One Michael VIII of the Paleologos dynasty deposes one of the Byzantine remnants, one of the claimants who had actually survived after the conquest of Constantinople and the Latin Empire, have been able to establish themselves in Western Anatolia, the Empire of Nicaea. This was held by the Lascaris dynasty until the Lascaris dynasty was deposed by Michael VIII Paleologos, who in 1261, against all odds, is able to retake the city from a weak and broken Latin Empire. And from 1261 until 1453, the empire is controlled by the Paleologos dynasty, centered in Constantinople, for nearly 200 years. Nevertheless, the empire doesn't represent a true restoration. Anatolia is never restored, let alone even Greece. If we think about parts of the Morea, the Greek islands, etc., Corfu, these places were never fully reconquered by the Byzantine authority. And indeed, by the 14th century, it looks as if they've even lost the mantle of the leading Orthodox power in the Balkans, losing it to Serbia, when Serbia begins to fragment, and we have the arrival of the Ottomans in around the year 1350 during the reign of Orhan. Although, as you mentioned, Hitman, the Ottomans look as if they're going to undergo some sort of collapse as a result of Timur's invasion of Anatolia in the beginning of the 15th century, they are able to recover under Mehmed II's father. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Is it Murad I, Murad II? Am I?
I'm not sure, sorry.
Right, I'll just quickly look that up for the sake of the audience. But nevertheless, he is able to restore unity to the empire and begin reclaiming territory that has been lost. Yes, it was indeed Murad II. And, and as a result of this, the Ottomans surround the Byzantine Empire on all fronts. And left with no other option, the Byzantine Emperor John VIII begins to appeal to the West for material aid. And in return for material aid, he has to form a union between the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Catholic Church and the Council of Florence, which is incredibly controversial back in Constantinople. But such is the price for any form of Western support. Western support comes in the form of the Crusade of Varna, which ends absolutely terribly. And when we come to Mehmed II shrugging off this submissive tributary state of Byzantium, which is surrounded by Ottoman territory, and makes his intent known that he's going to conquer the city and establish himself as essentially Emperor of Rome by right of conquest, Kaiser Rum, the support lent to the city is minimal in terms of the overall impact on the siege. The besieged forces are massively outnumbered. And in the ensuing siege, despite the formidable Theodosian walls, Mehmed II is able, with the use of cutting-edge, state-of-the-art artillery, and even moving his entire navy across into the Golden Horn by transporting them on land, he's able to take the city and force the remnants of the Paleologos dynasty to fend the Ottomans off in the Peloponnese Peninsula in the south of Greece, before they are then conquered a decade later. In the same decade, in the 1460s, the Komnenoi dynasty, one of the last great Byzantine dynasties, is taken, and their number are taken to Constantinople, and many members of it are executed. There we have the definitive end of, you can say, the semi-restoration of the Byzantine Empire. So considering those two scenarios, 1204 and 1453, these are the general sort of areas we're going to discuss in terms of how things could have turned out differently. What if Byzantium never fell?